So welcome. My name is Molly Ilbrock. I am Director of Corporate Communications at ESMT Berlin. It is my pleasure to welcome you to the ESMT Open Lecture with Özlem Bedre-Defolie, Associate Professor of Economics at ESMT. With our Open Lecture series, we invite experts and leaders to share their knowledge on a diverse range of subjects. It is always a great pleasure to host our own faculty in such a format. I will be your moderator today, and please feel free to put questions you might have into the Q&A at any time. We will take questions at the end of the session though. Let me tell you a little bit about Özlem. Özlem joined ESMT in 2010 after receiving her PhD in economics from Toulouse School of Economics. In 2019, she received a prestigious 1.5 million euro European Research Council starting grant to research digital platforms, pricing, variety, and quality provision. At this open lecture today, she will present some of her findings from this 5-year research project, which ultimately aims to make recommendations for an effective competition policy and regulation in digital markets. This, in turn, could greatly improve consumer welfare in the European Union. No one can deny the rising importance of e-commerce platforms, especially during the current global pandemic. Together with Simon Anderson of the University of Virginia Department of Economics, Özlem has developed a theoretical model to address the following questions. Under which conditions are hybrid business models profitable? What are the implications on third-party products or sellers and consumers? Today, Özlem will present this research and discuss the antitrust and tax policy implications of it. Please join me in welcoming Özlem Bedre. Özlem, the mic is yours.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Molly, for this very nice introduction. So it's my pleasure to present today my joint work with Simon Anderson, but more broadly, my research on this topic of digital platforms. So as Molly already mentioned, I'm going to talk about digital platforms, in particular, hybrid business models of those platforms. So let me start by just giving you some facts about those platforms. According to the numbers coming from January 2021, the 7 out of 10 most valuable companies, publicly owned companies, are digital platforms. For instance, Apple, Microsoft, Amazon, Alphabet, which is the parent company of Google, Facebook, Tencent, Alibaba Group. So this growth of digital platforms obviously was affected significantly by the corona. So there's this corona effect. Their market capitalization raised significantly in 2020. However, they were already in the top 10 previously, but increase during the corona times was significant. In particular, the value of Apple more than doubled, and Amazon's market capitalization jumped around 70%, and then this increase was around 60% for Microsoft, 39% for Facebook, and 23% for Alphabet. So these companies have become the most valuable firms in the world, if we look at this scene of publicly owned companies. But beside that, obviously, again, Corona has affected this significantly too, but we have been seeing this increased rise of e-commerce taking a big, major, or significant portion of the retail trade in the world. So in US, in 2020, $374 billion were spent on e-commerce, B2C e-commerce, which was roughly around 10% of retail revenue in US. And this number was around 262 billion in UK, which accounted for nearly 30% of the total retail sales in UK market. And the second largest e-commerce market in Europe is Germany, with the number of 122 billion, around roughly 12.2% of the total retail trade. So if you look at the just e-commerce, already this tells us how important portion of economy has been generated, or the sales have been generated via e-commerce, and who is the main player or the dominant player in these e-commerce markets, then we see Amazon. Amazon appears to be a dominant platform both in Germany, in UK, and in general in European markets, but also in US market, with the market shares in US around 40%, in UK and Germany around 30%. So this is a significant amount of trade going through only one digital platform if we just focus on the e-commerce market. Before going into my study with Simon Anderson about e-commerce platforms, I want to give you some important understanding of these markets and their dynamics. So these markets are mostly characterized by an effect called network effects, which is also known as demand-side economies of scale. So what does it mean? In those examples, I'm highlighting, for instance, Alibaba, Amazon, and eBay as e-commerce platforms, and their value significantly raises due to the fact that there are positive cross-group network effects between buyers and sellers. So more buyers going to those platforms to look for a product increase sellers' willingness to join those platforms as a third-party seller. And similarly, more sellers coming increase the variety, so increase the attractiveness of those platforms for buyers. And due to these positive network effects, these platforms have grown significantly and very quickly and reached this, what they call the tipping points, and become very dominant in their markets. But at the same time, due to those network effects, the dominant players have this advantage against the newcomers because the network effects generate barriers to entry for a new platform to come to those markets. But if we look at the start of those platforms, we obviously see how they initiated their business, and their business mostly rely on reducing search or some sort of transaction cost between different groups of users by enabling their transactions. So those platforms were mostly in the business of enabling interactions between different groups of users rather than producing a product and selling it, or investing in a service provision and selling the services themselves. So these are not producers. They are mostly initiating interactions between other producers and the buyers of these services or the products. And if you look at another example of the platforms, which is the Google Android App Store, Google Play, and also Apple iOS App Store, they are initiating, enabling interactions between app developers on one side and the users of their systems on the other side. Again, more app developers imply more variety, and more users are willing to use those systems, and more users coming imply higher expected returns for the in-app purchases for app developers. So app developers are willing to join those platforms. So this cross-group positive network effects was the stimulator of the growth of these digital platforms. And I have given you already a couple of examples, both from the first slide and on this slide. But if you look at not only big companies, but also in the startup scene, in particular, if you look at Berlin-based startups, we also see a significant growing number of digital markets or the digital marketplaces in the startup scene. For instance, Raisin, which is a marketplace between deposit holders or the savers and the banks, or Home24 or Helping or SoundCloud are other good examples of those digital platforms from the startup scene. Okay, so these are just to give you some important facts about these markets, their characteristics, and how the besides being very fast-growing markets, those markets are also characterized by having one platform offering several complementary products or services. This we can see, for instance, from the example of Google. Google launched itself as a Google search platform, but then added other services like email, Google Gmail, cloud, analytics, etc. And similarly, Facebook was launched as a social media platform, but then it acquired WhatsApp, Instagram, and also added marketplace and other services to its offering. And the Amazon has the same story. It is a marketplace, but also it has video services, and it has a product like ebook reader, Kindle, and other services, also like cloud services, important part of the B2B services of Amazon. And Apple very recently launched its service business as well. So it was a hardware platform, but now Apple also offers different services. So adding these complementary segments increase the value of these platforms even more for consumers. But then is it bad for consumers? Not obviously, not necessarily. Indeed, it is good news because most of these services are either offered freely, like in the example of Google search, or at a very low prices, like many people might associate Amazon having very low prices for many products. So then the consumers benefit from buying all these complementary products or services from these big platforms, either at zero or low prices, okay? But then another argument coming from microeconomics literature argues that having one monopoly, having complementary products is better than each complementary segment being sold by competing firms. This is well-known Cournot analysis from very early stages of the microeconomics, the literature. So basically this argument tells us that maybe it is not too bad to have one platform owning all these complementary segments and services and being dominant. It might be better than different firms offering these services separately. So I just wanted to highlight the fact that it's not obvious that the dominance in those markets is bad news for the consumers. Besides, there's also gains from the data in the sense that when a platform observes one particular individual across different segments, that platform knows a lot about the individual, so can personalize the product or the service offered to that individual, improving the value generated by its services or the products. Good example is Google search. If Google knows many people and for a given individual across different search behavior, its search algorithm gets even better, or recommendation systems are another other good examples of this value generation via different type of data observation. All this together, network effects and being present in the complementary segment markets give rise to basically few dominant platforms dominating nearly everything we do in our everyday lives. So these are like a couple of platforms called as GAFAM, Google, Amazon, Facebook, Apple, and Microsoft. Basically, they control the decisions on the options that we see for nearly everything we do. So this is very important because we see this rising power of platforms, but I just wanted to first highlight that it might not be that bad news for consumers to have dominant players controlling the complementary offerings. And in particular, when there are network effects, there are gains from having dominant players in the market in order to exploit or in order to benefit from the network effects. Okay. However, they have been raising tensions and the discussions in the antitrust area, and also some debates started from a couple of years ago, but in particular increased its importance and the significance in the media and also in the political debate in 2019. So I show you in this picture some cover of The Economist from 2019, but also from the presidential debate of the US elections, the previous elections, basically the Democratic candidate Elizabeth Warren proposing to break up big tech companies into several small companies. And I am also putting here a nice scholar who will be even more important in the coming years. I'm going to tell you why. Lina Khan, she was doing her PhD in Yale when she wrote her thesis. She's a law scholar. Her thesis was about the antitrust paradox of Amazon. Her main point in the thesis was basically saying that prices should not be the only measure of understanding how the dominance of players in the market can affect consumers or the consumer welfare. She was stating the fact that we should also look closely how the dominance of the digital platforms affect variety, quality, and innovation in those markets, which are important factors that will be boosted only by competition or the competitive markets and the open markets. So she was more worried about non-price dimensions of those distortions that might be arising from the dominance of these digital platforms. And Lina Khan recently, at least not officially nominated, but the President Biden of the United States announced that she will be nominated as the chairperson of the Federal Trade Commission, which is the antitrust body of the United States. So she will be leading the head of the antitrust body of the United States, likely, is again not officially approved, as a chairperson of this FTC, the antitrust authority in the US. So she was a very prominent figure in this discussion. But also, if you look at 2020, in Europe, European Commission in December 2020, announced a set of rules, basically the proposal how Europe is planning to regulate those digital markets, like Digital Services Act concerning markets with services and Digital Markets Act for the products markets. And in those proposals, basically European Commission defined new cutoff thresholds to understand the dominance power or the dominant position of those players, stating basically it's not only a function of the market shares anymore, which was the usual antitrust approach before. Now we also have to look at their gatekeeper position, meaning that what is the number of business customers they have and the number of users they have as subscribers or the users of the platform will determine whether they are passing this gatekeeper thresholds or not. And if they pass, they have to follow some guidelines and regulations. They have the list of have to do and not to do for those gatekeeper platforms. And all of these platforms that I stated to you, the GAFAM platforms, they fall under this gatekeeper definition of European Commission. And in the US House report, again, it was in the fall 2020, announced what are the accusations against Apple, Amazon, and Facebook and Google, mainly criticizing those platforms' practices that might give advantages to their own subsidiaries at the cost of basically either giving bad terms for the competing third-party providers of services or the products on their platforms. And despite all this antitrust debate, economists, again, February 2021, very recently, start with the cover of the Economist, stating that the value of this the big tech companies indeed has grown, have been rising despite of this antitrust scrutiny interventions or the Biden administration stating how strict the regulation will be against the big tech companies. So their value is growing despite all this potential antitrust and the regulatory interventions arising into this scene. So I want to now focus on the hybrid platforms because many of those platforms that I mentioned have this business model called as hybrid business platform business model. So what is that? For instance, think about Amazon. Amazon is a marketplace enabling interactions between third-party sellers and the buyers. Basically, whenever third-party products sold on Amazon, buyers buy it and the sellers have to give a commission to Amazon, like a percentage commission. But Amazon also sells its own products or the private labels, like Amazon Basics, but also it purchases branded products from manufacturers and resells them as a reseller. So Amazon has this dual function of being a reseller and at the same time a marketplace in a given category of the products. And if you look at which category or which part of Amazon is the biggest, in terms of volume, 53% of the volume of sales come from Amazon third-party sales. This is the number from 2019. So this shows that indeed, in terms of volume, Amazon Marketplace have become larger than the Amazon's its own reseller channel. And again, if you ask a question of what are the key decisions Amazon take as a marketplace, it decides on the prices, basically the commissions it charges on the third-party sellers. It decides on how to rank those products. When someone looks for something on Amazon.com or Amazon.de, that person basically sees a list, and that list, based on algorithm or the ranking that the Amazon specifies. But Amazon also decides on the logistics, so it offers logistics services, and third-party sellers heavily rely on Amazon logistics for delivery or other aftermarket services. And even in the US, some third-party sellers call these logistics services of Amazon as the railroads of the trade in the old days. Basically, they can't function without Amazon logistics anymore. This is the case for many US sellers and also many European sellers. And Amazon has also the significant access of the control and access of the data collected from the activities of the buyers on its own marketplace. So Amazon knows a lot about who looks for what and purchases what when looking for what. So all this history of the purchasing behavior and the search behavior of the consumers on Amazon Marketplace is collected as data by Amazon, but Amazon does not share this data with the third-party sellers, but uses it for its own algorithm to target users via the appropriate products or the matches and other services, obviously, that Amazon offers. And if you look at the pricing just, we can see that Amazon's commissions vary significantly across different categories. For instance, it can go from 8% for video game consoles to 96% to extended warranties and protection plans. And this is to say that those commissions do not vary within a category a lot. So they are mostly constant, but across categories, they vary significantly. And this, according to what, is an important question for this antitrust analysis. Indeed, in my paper with Simon Anderson from University of Virginia, we try to understand determinants of this pricing incentives of Amazon in a given category. And also we want to understand what is the incentive of the platform to be also present as a reseller. For instance, if you look at Amazon, Amazon as a reseller channel generates its 24% of the reseller revenues from electronics, 19% from sporting goods and entertainment, and 14.5% from accessories and clothing. So Amazon is big in those categories as a reseller, but then in those categories, if you see, we can see that the commissions are also higher. That doesn't prove anything about whenever Amazon is a big in reseller, is going to charge high commissions. That doesn't say anything about the causal relationship, in other words. However, we want to understand how the Amazon's presence in a category is going to affect its commission and how it will going to determine the level of this commission for the third-party sellers. And this is another motivation of my research with Simon Anderson. And another important fact is the Amazon role as a gatekeeper for many sellers. 37% of the third-party sellers in the US rely solely only on Amazon to access their consumers. This is a significant amount of sellers, but again, this is from US market. I don't have data from German market, but in Germany, there have been also significant concerns for the small and medium-sized businesses relying heavily on Amazon as their trade channel, basically. And that will be something that also we will capture in our theoretical model, okay? So I just wanted to give you the facts before we go to what we are doing in the model. And finally, this hybrid business model is not specific to the Amazon or the e-commerce platforms, but it's also used by Android, Google Play, or the App Store of the Google, or Apple iOS App Store. So basically, those app stores enable interactions between third-party apps and their users, but also they sell their own apps on the same app store, competing against the third-party apps. And their own apps basically could be music, TV, etc. But then they also charge, like Amazon, a commission for the in-app purchases of the third-party apps. And what are then the decisions of those, the providers of the app store? Basically, they control access of the apps, third-party apps on their app store. So that's the basically curation decision of the platform. They also control pricing, so they can choose which commission they charge. And this is now quite stable, 30% they charge for the in-app purchases. And they also control the data. And indeed, there is a very recent decision by the iOS announced that the iOS will not anymore share identifier of the user on the App Store. So they will not share the data with the third-party app provider, data of the customer. So now Apple is entering into the advertising market of the mobile apps, basically, because they launched their app platform to use that basically advantage of the data to advertise rather than giving away to their third-party providers. So what are the antitrust concerns around hybrid platforms? In particular, European Commission's investigation emphasized the dual role of the big dominant platforms like Amazon. being important and potentially creating conflict of interest. And they argue that Amazon should, as a leader in the e-commerce market, should provide fair and undistorted access to the consumers. But also there have been lawsuits and complaints against the app stores of Apple and Google. So for instance, Spotify sued Apple in front of European Commission for its high commissions, but there's also Epic Games case against the App Store and Apple App Store and Google Play. But what are the key concerns in all this discussion against the dominant hybrid platforms is that they might be distorting access of third-party providers or sellers to consumers, favoring their own products like Amazon products, or Apple and Google favoring their own apps, and using third-party sales data for their own product decisions. So these were the three key sources of complaints. And now I'm going to present you briefly my work with Simon Anderson to really try to capture how we can address, first of all, the question of whether hybrid business models are profitable, and if so, how they are going to affect variety and the prices offered by the dominant platform. So we consider one trade platform, which decides first whether to sell its own product, and it can choose the price of its own product, PA in this picture, and the commission it charges over the third-party sales revenue on its platform, T. Okay, so these are the percentage commissions that I showed you for different product categories. But think about now that we are focusing on one category. And within this category, there are differentiated sellers, which we call fringe sellers, because they are small. Each of them is so tiny that they can't affect the equilibrium prices, but they decide whether to come to the platform after observing whether the platform has its own product in that category or not, and observing the commissions charged. And they have to incur some costs. These are like establishing their relationship with Amazon and, you know, signing the contracts and the terms and guaranteeing that those terms are satisfied by the product. And this is the fixed cost K. And they choose, if they come in, their own price. On the other side, we think about buyers, like continuum of them, mass of them. They decide whether to visit the platform. Visiting costs time, so they will face this different intrinsic cost of visiting the platform. But once they get into platform, they see how much utility they can get if they buy the platform product A, that's the quality minus price, plus their match value or the taste for this product, epsilon. And they can also buy the third-party product, and then they get this other utility, quality minus price of the third-party product plus the match value. Or they can just walk away and take their outside option, which will be basically not buying the product on the platform, but getting somewhere else. Okay. And in this model, we solve this model using game theoretical tools, subgame perfect Nash equilibrium, and try to understand how this decision of whether to be present with my product or not, what is the determinants of this decision? And if I am present, how the factors like my product quality, my product cost, how these would change the commissions that I charge to the third-party sellers. And also there is a parameter which captures competitiveness between the third-party sellers and the platform-owned product. So we can basically say important parameters that will affect equilibrium pricing and the number of third-party products, what we call the variety in a given category of the products. And what are the key results that we obtain? The first result is that the hybrid platform increases its commission, T in that picture, on the third-party sellers if its product is better in the terms of either quality, has a higher quality VA, or a lower cost CA. So when the platform-owned product has a high value or low cost, then the platform increases commission on the third-party sellers. And that is basically a crucial thing, because when platform product gets better, it's still some demand from the third-party sellers. So that means that the third-party sellers, anticipating that, will be less willing to come to the platform because they will get less demand on the platform if the platform already has its own product very strong there. So that will lower the variety coming to the platform in that given category. when the platform product is strong. So on one side, platform product is strong, good news for consumers. On the other side, there will be less variety coming, so bad news for consumers. So these two effects basically going against each other in terms of consumer welfare. But at the end, what happens is that since the commission charged by the platform raises, that will lead to lower consumer surplus in equilibrium, because commissions charged by the platform on the third-party sales will be reflected on the third-party products prices, so they will be paid by the consumers, and then that will lower welfare generated for consumers. So this is kind of unexpected result, because in standard models of microeconomics, if a product gets better in terms of quality or lower cost, it is good news for consumers. But this is not the case here, because here, when product gets better, the platform can tax its rivals. And taxation happens because of this hybrid business model. So the platform raises commission charge on the third-party products, and that's going to be reflected on the final prices, and that's going to increase prices and harm consumers, despite the fact that the platform product has higher quality. And if we ask the question of when it is profitable for the platform to be hybrid, if there is no cost of own product, so in this picture it is KA, if KA is 0, it's always better to be hybrid. In other words, profits from hybrid mode is always, in this picture, this curve is always above the profits from the pure marketplace mode. And here I show the horizontal axis, the value of the platform owned product, which is XA, so it's the quality minus cost. And on the vertical axis, I'm showing the profits. So the profits from the marketplace, pure marketplace mode is constant because platform product does not exist there. But the profits from the hybrid mode lie above the marketplace profits. Why? Because when the value of the own product goes to minus infinity, it's as if I'm a pure marketplace. So I start from here and I'm always lying above because of the fact that there is always value from more variety, because consumers value variety, because these varieties are differentiated and consumers like it. But when platform product has some fixed cost KA, then basically the platform profit goes down. So then we identify a cutoff point for the platform product quality XA, or the net quality minus cost, below which platform prefers to be pure marketplace and above which platform prefers to be a hybrid platform. So then if we are looking at on the left-hand side, then we should go and try to understand the consumer welfare implication. So then basically now in the second graph, I'm showing consumer surplus on the vertical axis, where the consumer surplus is again constant in the platform product quality when it is a pure marketplace. However, consumer surplus, if you remember the previous result, is decreasing in the platform product quality if it's hybrid platform, because of the fact that platform increases taxes on its rivals when its own product gets better. And because of these effects, whenever the platform switches to the hybrid mode, consumer surplus will gonna drop from that level to the hybrid mode level and keep going down whenever platform product improves. So this is to say, banning hybrid mode is beneficial to the consumer welfare, because whenever it is chosen, it is bad news for consumers, okay? And coming back to the steering concerns, in those antitrust investigations, they were concerned that Amazon or the other dominant hybrid platforms steer consumers towards their own subsidiary or the products. This was mentioned by New York Times and the Wall Street Journal articles. In our paper, we can have an implication for this type of concern in the sense that we can think about platform being able to increase the perceived value of its own product at the cost of lowering the perceived quality of the third-party products. How could that happen? Basically, in the ranking, platform can give prominence to its own product. And this is the short way of capturing this prominence. By putting it on the higher rank, consumers might perceive this as if this product is better in terms of the reviews, for instance. And if that happens, it is profitable only if the platform has a sufficiently strong product. So it's not always true that Amazon wants to steer consumers towards its own products. Amazon wants to do that if it has strong products. But whenever it does it, it is bad news for consumers. So again, going back to the antitrust concerns, it's not true that Amazon or hybrid platform, dominant platform wants always to steer towards its own product. Why it's not true? Because it can tax or get a fraction of the revenues generated from other products too. So there is no incentive to divert consumers towards a lower quality or bad product if that happens to be the Amazon's its own product. So that's the key result that we have in that paper with respect to the steering concerns. And very briefly about the taxation of digital platforms, I know that I'm nearly at the end of my talk. I want to mention this because this is another aspect. When we started our project, we did not think about doing the taxation of digital platforms, but simultaneously we have been seeing this debate about how to tax digital platforms. And in particular in France, French government introduced digital tax for the big tech companies. And in particular, they introduced 3% tax on the Amazon's revenues from the marketplace in the French market. And that was in August 2019. And Amazon reacted in October, basically by raising its commissions over the third-party sales in its own marketplace in France. So that basically was exactly 1-for-1 increase of the commission by 3%, which was the amount of the tax. So that was interesting because people complained and stated that that was a bad behavior of Amazon and that will cause consumers. And indeed, in my paper with Simon, what we are showing is that if you tax a hybrid dominant platform revenue from third-party sales, say unit tax or percentage tax, we indeed predict that the commissions charged on third-party sellers will go up due to the tax, and that's going to harm consumers. So our results show that the French tax harms consumers in the French market rather than basically benefiting consumers. However, the better optimal taxation should do taxation on retail revenues of the platform. What does it mean? Revenues generated from the own products of a hybrid platform should be taxed. If this is taxed, basically, if we give the example of Amazon, if Amazon revenues from own Amazon products is taxed, then Amazon is going to lower commission on the third-party products, and that will increase variety and lower consumer prices. So this is the key, basically, implication for the taxation of digital platforms. And let me then conclude in this remaining time. These conclusions are mainly on this paper of hybrid platform model joined with Simon Anderson, but I have other projects ongoing in the topic. Let me just give you the key findings of that paper first before 1 minute maybe talking about other projects. So what we did in that paper is try to provide a tractable framework and capturing important aspects of e-commerce platforms, which could be also hybrid. In our model, we endogenously generate this hybrid platform. In other words, we allow platform to be hybrid, selling its own product or not, then it's a pure marketplace. And what we show is that when the platform product quality increases in the hybrid mode, or it is cost decreases, it's bad news for consumers because platform is going to charge higher commissions on third-party product sales. And that's going to lower variety, and that's going to lead to higher prices for consumers. And what are other policy implications? If we ban hybrid mode, that will benefit consumers. This result should be taken with some, grain of salt because we did not consider other benefits that the platforms might generate. For instance, this logistics services Amazon offers, etc. So we are not looking at these services, but this result is about the business model of the platform. So we are not saying that platforms are bad, but the hybrid business model harms consumers in our framework. And if we allow taxation, then we show that taxing marketplace revenue from third-party sales harms consumers, which was the French tax basically. However, taxing the revenues generated from the own reseller channel would benefit the consumers. And this is what we are proposing as a policy intervention rather than and maybe strict ban, because strict ban would be kind of completely banning that business mode, and that might also lead to platform altogether getting rid of the marketplace and becoming a retailer itself with its own products, which we also do in the paper. Look at this counterfactual scenario. If the platform prefers a pure retailer model, then in that case, indeed, ban of hybrid mode would be harmful. So that's why I put the ban of hybrid mode is beneficial if the platform prefers pure marketplace mode in the banned situation. And very briefly on my other ongoing projects, currently I'm working on also understanding this platform strategies of entering complementary segments, like one platform having a dominant position in one market, another platform having dominant position in another market, and suppose that there's an innovation opportunity arise in the rivals market, and how or who is going to be the one winning that innovation opportunity. This is very interesting because of this observation of Apple, for instance, entering into the advertising market is something that probably antitrust and regulatory authorities will be looking into and trying to understand how this will affect competition between Apple and Google in the advertising market, but also Apple and Google in the Android or in the App Store market. Thank you very much. And this is all I would like to say for the lecture today. I'm happy to hear your comments and questions.
Thank you so much, Özlem. Yeah, we already have a few questions in the Q&A, so I would invite everyone to put your questions into the Q&A, and I will start with the very first one I got, which I probably should have asked you before we started. Will we be able to share this presentation?
Yes, I think the presentation, yes, we will be able to share that.
What I will tell then all of our viewers, then we will be sending and anyone who's registered an email with a link to pick the presentation up in the next day or two. So we'll figure that one out. Sorry for not having been prepared from the moderator's side on that one. So let's go to the first question from the audience. I have a couple myself too, but I have one around the fees that Amazon charges. So does Amazon charge fixed fees to the market sellers, or can Amazon change the fee at its sole discretion at any moment in time? So is there any regulation of the fees they can charge?
So that's a good question. So those fees that I showed you are listed fees of Amazon for a given product category, but they are not listed that in the way that I showed them. Basically, Amazon has a calculator for each seller. So then the seller doesn't know exactly what is the fee in a given category, but Amazon tells the seller via the calculator, that's going to be the fee depending on, I don't know, which value item you sell and how many items you expect to sell in a given month or in a given year, etc. But at the end, those fees are constant across the volume of sales, but they just depend on the category. So they are fixed for some time, but obviously Amazon can update them and sell as long as it sells. It sends sellers and information about those upsells and give them some time to decide whether they keep selling their products on Amazon or not. But they can update those fees. And there has been some changes over time, but I don't have so much data to talk about how much they vary over time. But in general, there is no regulation on that.
Okay, well, I have a second question from the same person asking a little bit about fees as well. Is changing search algorithms equivalent to so-called dynamic fees, where fees charged to market sellers would be changed at Amazon's sole discretion?
So that's a tricky one, because Amazon also has this Amazon choice labeling. And Amazon puts this label based on my information, basically, which is again not publicly available by discussion with people who worked for Amazon or who have been in these circles. Basically, what I know is Amazon looks at the reviews of the product first, but also it looks at the fee that it can generate from that product, so the value of the product. And then Amazon accordingly determines this ranking for who would be shown as an Amazon choice. So in other words, maybe some sellers might be willing to give higher commissions to be able to shown as an Amazon choice. So ranking might be linked to the pricing, but there is no public information on that. So that's why it's hard to say. So the fees that I showed were like listing fees or listed fees. There is no information in the public domain about how the Amazon choice decision is made. This is also something regulators are looking into, basically, how Amazon links ranking to the pricing.
So it's a bit of a black box, if you will, for consumers and regulators. So here's another question coming in. Do you believe that there'll be an increase of e-commerce on platforms after the pandemic? Do you think it'll stay as high or increase? What's your vision for the future?
It's difficult to predict, but I think there is some behavioral changes, and I expect those behaviors to persist even after opening up the economy, because people have discovered how convenient it is to do shopping in their homes, right, from just couch. And previously, probably they were doing that to some extent, but now they are doing it for items that they never think about buying online. So those items in particular, like furniture, people used to go to the shops rather than buying online. But those items, I think, will have the highest hit in terms of the e-commerce revenues. But normal items, I don't know, like groceries or other electronic purchases, which were already done via e-commerce, I expect them to have similar numbers. So I think it depends on the product category, short answer. So.
Very, very interesting. I could talk privately about that, but I won't, because I have so many questions coming in. And the really interesting is, where have you tested this model? Has it been tested on a wider range of products and service categories? And are there any differences that you have observed? And very, very interesting from the consumer standpoint, what about the buyer psychologies and the impacts of brands? So these are kind of two different questions.
Right. So about testing, so main motivation of my ERC research proposal was basically coming up with a framework, theoretical framework, that could be brought to data, because existing frameworks did not have sufficiently rich setup to capture these important characteristics of e-commerce platforms like Amazon. If they wanted to introduce them, it becomes suddenly very cumbersome and not analytically tractable. So the framework that we propose indeed could be tested using the data, but the problem of testing is that we don't have that proprietary data of Amazon. So this is, again, it's not in the public domain. So who has the Amazon data is Amazon's own researchers. They have the Amazon data, or the regulators or the antitrust. But this data, since it is confidential, is not publicly shared with the researchers. So that's the challenge for many researchers. To be able to test these models, we need data. So if you have any access or willingness to share e-commerce data, this basically model could be tested. But we can already say what are the important characteristics. For instance, like differentiation parameter I showed in the model. If differentiation in the market increases, in other words, competition decreases, the area where hybrid platform is profitable increases. We have this type of testable implications too. On the other question, so it was about the brand image and the consumer psychology about this. So this is a model which assumes the consumers are doing rational choices. Obviously, we can incorporate, and I believe that in many online markets, consumer behavior is not always super rational. And they might be, I don't know, attracted by some behavioral aspects, like they might be making mistakes and they might not see everything, or even though they see them, they do not process them rationally. This is one thing one can incorporate into this model. The second is brand image. In that model is captured by differentiation parameter. So differentiation could be generated from anything, and it is there already. So the model captures branding already. But if there is some other psychological behavior of consumers, for instance, ignoring prices when they choose the brand, this is not captured. We assume that consumers take into prices into account. So these type of things could be incorporated, but currently we assume that consumers are acting rationally based on information they have.
And I know I always act rationally, especially as a consumer. So I have a couple of questions that go together. I'm going to try to put them together because it's about the supplier side and fulfillment. So one person asked, Amazon almost charges 30% of the product price to include the logistic fees, and you also need to advertise investment, et cetera. Is there a better platform in Germany or Europe? Because it seems like Amazon has a monopoly here. And on the same vein, the question was, do you have an analysis from the supplier side? So it shows the impact on consumers, but what about the sellers who are, as in the first question, in this situation where they have to use this platform?
So that's a good question. The first one, Amazon is not the monopoly in the German market. So in Germany, other platforms that are big, I think one can find that, I think ASOS,
yeah.
ASOS is another big one, and Zalando in the fashion is another big one. So the Amazon has market share, which is big portion, so which is named as the dominant platform, which is about 30%. But the other platforms are also big. So I don't have the exact numbers of these other platforms. Other platforms also offer logistics. So Zalando also does something what Amazon does. It offers this logistics to its partners. And how much Zalando charges versus how much Amazon charges is a different question because they have different selling points. One is fashion branding, the other one does not have just fashion, it has everything. So I think Amazon what we are looking in the model is trying to understand, would Amazon want to charge high commissions or high margin on its logistics, or instead prefer to make money from the percentage commissions? Currently, we don't develop this model, but we don't develop this extension, sorry. But what we are predicting is it might be better to make profits from the commissions rather than adding markup to the logistics, because if you enable more sellers to come in and sell their products, that will improve the total revenues that you can cash via the commissions. So that's why the model would probably predict it makes sense to sell logistics at the cost and basically don't add too much margin there, but make more money from the commissions. And I don't know exactly what Amazon does in reality. So what is the percentage of revenue it generates from logistics versus the sales revenue? So that number I don't have. For the third-party sellers' point of view, this model predicts that third-party sellers obviously lose due to the Amazon product getting better. In the model, we model them having the same quality, which was V parameter in the model, but we could incorporate heterogeneity in their qualities. Then there will be fewer sellers coming in, and those sellers who come in will have less profits when Amazon product gets better or gets more prominence, put it this way. So the sellers will be loser if the Amazon product quality increases or the Amazon product cost decreases, or the hybrid mode appears rather than the marketplace mode. So it harms sellers and it harms consumers.
So they're pretty much at a disadvantage no matter what happens, if I'm understanding correctly.
The
seller.
I should say, I should be careful there, because if Amazon marketplace if Amazon hybrid business mode does not exist and Amazon or the platform prefers to be a retailer instead, selling its own products, then sellers are going to be indeed worse off in that case compared to hybrid mode. So our counterfactual is, if I ban hybrid, platform becomes pure marketplace. So it doesn't sell its own products, but sells third parties. And it keeps offering logistics and other services as before. But we didn't do the full-fledged analysis of how the pricing of other services would change if you ban hybrid mode. Then maybe, we don't know, maybe the platform will also raise the prices of these other additional services, and then there might be some trade-offs for the sellers as well. So unfortunately, the theoretical framework cannot capture everything.
I know, it's not.
We can add these parts of the model. This is not so difficult, and incorporate them in the model.
Yeah. I like to see things a little black and white, I know sometimes. One question came in, which was also very, would interest me as well. Do you think this is where regulation needs to be going, or is it more important to look at the taxing of Amazon? Is it the tax advantage of these different platform companies that are being taxed in such a different way than a established retailer that is downtown, wherever?
So there are many interesting dimensions how regulation can go. One is taxation. And obviously they were seen as taking advantage of the taxation compared to normal downtown or the brick and mortar retailers. So I think personally, I wouldn't advocate for banning hybrid models altogether, because that would mean a lot of structural change and things might go very badly for third-party sellers during these changes. So I would say more like controlling what they own, like as data. And this is indeed the regulators are also thinking about doing. So basically giving access to the third-party sellers their own consumer data, so that third-party sellers know better who buys my product, rather than Amazon just having this access to this data as a monopolist. And another thing could be taxing Amazon channel its own retail channel revenues rather than the third-party sellers' revenues. So basically making Amazon realize that whenever you are acting like a reseller in the same market against the third-party sellers, you have to pay me a tax. So that will improve the market condition, because you kind of balance the conflict of interest between Amazon and the third-party sellers. Breaking them up again is something very hard. Because, you know, it's like eggs, right? It's already mixed up. So how are you going to break them up? So this is something very structurally hard. So I think radical solutions, I'm not advocate for those, but more like taxation could be one thing, controlling or enabling access to the seller's own data for their own consumers. And obviously respecting the privacy provision as well at the same time. So there might be other, you know, Amazon might say, this might cost me a lot. So the regulators might then need to put some money aside to make sure that this data sharing will be done respecting the privacy of the individuals. And yeah, I think these are the potential regulatory interventions that I can think of.
I have several more questions, but I'm afraid we're drawing to an end, and I would like to take one of the very last questions that came in. I know it's not always fair, first come, first served, but in this question, it's a perfect one to end this wonderful open lecture, Özlem. How optimistic are you about regulation? Do you think it will be able to achieve politically the goals it needs to and be successful?
So it's a tough one. So I think it depends on what regulation we are talking about. For instance, just to give you an example of this data sharing regulation. Since the regulators emphasize the privacy being protected and it's something important, and data should be, you know, not shared, and there's this privacy regulation, which I'm not touching in my paper, but there's this also regulation discussion going on, and there was GDPR introduced. For instance, GDPR harmed small websites rather than the big tech, because it was much more costly. So it's a fixed cost. And if you are big, that fixed cost doesn't mean anything for you. But if you are small, that's a big thing. So that's why this regulation basically disadvantaged small players at the advantage of the big ones. And again, other privacy regulation, now I heard that, you know, the big tech companies are trying to develop advertising targeting technologies that will target individuals without identifying their IDs. But the small ones, they are not able to do that. So that will also might give a disadvantage to the small players. Or like Apple, for instance, and not enabling a collection of the ID on the App Store, or the Google Chrome not allowing shops to collect the cookies and the Google search, would disadvantage small players, because they have to go through big giants like Google, Facebook, or Apple to be able to place their ads. They can't target consumers via the cookies, for instance. So I think that there are many aspects of the regulation that can harm small players. But for this hybrid platform regulation, I think it is likely that the taxing the hybrid platforms, their own reseller channel revenues, would not directly lead to losses. So I think this is a one way of good intervention, or the regulation, if you put it, that is a more taxation policy, or really looking into what hybrid platforms do and trying to make sure that they do not use the data at the advantage of their retailer channel, because that was another concern of those cases, that the Amazon or other hybrid platforms use the data of the third-party sellers to introduce their own products, for instance, to basically first test on the others and then decide which product to introduce to the market. And if these type of things are identified, I think the antitrust authorities should look closer. I think effect-based approach is better than altogether banning structural the business models. So that's why I'm advocating more looking closer. And obviously, resources are very limited in the antitrust and the regulatory agencies. So that creates, I think, the burden for those policymakers or the implementers of these policies. So.
Thank you so much, Özlem. Thank you for a wonderful open lecture. Thank you to everyone who took part today. I would like to let you know we will do a follow-up, not only with the presentation, we will add some links to the papers that Özlem discussed, what is available online. But if you look on ESMT.org or ESMT.Berlin and look up Özlem, you will also find the working papers and things she's working on, but we'll send you some good links to find out more. Thanks again, everyone who was here. Thank you, Özlem. Great time had by all. Appreciate it.
Thank you very much for all these questions and the comments. Thank you.
Thanks.
Have a good day. Bye-bye.